What if a single act of kindness could change not just one life, but two? This is the story of Emma Lawson, a struggling food truck owner with a dream she refused to give up, and Daniel, a young culinary student searching for hope. Together, their chance encounter leads to a journey of transformation, perseverance, and the unexpected power of giving. Before we dive into this heartfelt tale, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories like this one. Let's begin. Emma Lawson wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric still warm from the heat of the stove. She stood behind her food truck, Emma's Comfort Eats, in a park that seemed quiet and desolate at this time of day. The lunch rush had yet to arrive, and it had been a while since she'd had a decent stream of customers. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden hue across the empty benches and tables scattered around her truck. For the 1,000th time, she checked her watch. It was almost noon, and still no one was in sight. Emma wasn't the type to give up easily. She never had been. But at 35, after years of culinary school and working in some of the finest restaurants, she never imagined she would end up running a small food truck. She had dreams of owning a restaurant, a place where she could create beautiful, complex dishes that reflected her talent and passion. But those dreams seemed farther and farther out of reach each day. Her food truck wasn't flashy, and it certainly wasn't trendy. She didn't serve exotic foods or Instagram-worthy dishes. Instead, Emma focused on comfort food, simple, hearty meals that reminded people of home. Meatloaf sandwiches, mac and cheese, and mashed potatoes were her specialties, and they were made with love and care. Yet, despite her efforts, business was slow. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and her food truck, once a symbol of her hope and ambition, now felt like a weight around her neck. The trendy food trucks were the ones drawing the crowds. The avocado ice cream truck, the sushi burrito stand, those were the ones with the long lines. Emma's truck, with its faded paint and worn-out fridge, seemed almost invisible in comparison. She leaned against the counter, staring out at the empty park, feeling a sense of defeat creeping in. The constant hum of the refrigerator in the truck was the only sound breaking the silence. And even that seemed to be giving out on her, emitting a grinding noise that made Emma cringe. Her thoughts were interrupted by the screeching sound of another food truck pulling into the park. It was sleek, shiny, with modern graphics plastered all over it. The truck parked a few yards away, and within moments, a crowd had gathered around it, drawn in by the trendy food and the hip atmosphere. Emma watched them, her stomach sinking. She had been in their shoes before, a part of the vibrant, competitive culinary scene, but now she was an outsider, watching from the sidelines. As she stood there, lost in thought, a sense of weariness washed over her. She wiped her hands again, this time on her jeans, and took a deep breath. She didn't want to give up. She couldn't afford to. But as the minutes ticked by and the sun began its slow descent in the sky, Emma felt the weight of her situation pressing down harder and harder on her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the overwhelming tide of failure. This wasn't how she imagined it. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet here she was, struggling just to keep her dream alive. She didn't have the answers. But what choice did she have? Emma looked around the park once more, took another deep breath, and silently vowed to keep going, even if it meant starting over from scratch. Just as she was about to retreat into her truck to prepare for another slow day, a man walked up to her food truck. He looked like he had been through a storm, his clothes wrinkled, his hair tousled, and there was a wariness in his eyes that spoke volumes. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at the menu board and then at the empty truck. Emma watched him from behind the counter, wondering what had brought him here. With a hesitant step, the man approached the counter. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "Are you still open?" he asked, looking unsure of himself. Emma gave a tired but warm smile. "Of course," she replied, trying to muster some energy in her voice. "What can I get for you?" The man shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable, but his eyes locked onto the menu. "I'll just take a grilled cheese with tomato soup," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded and immediately got to work. She was grateful for the order. Any order at this point was a blessing. As she prepared the simple meal, she couldn't help but notice the way the man sat down at one of the nearby benches. His shoulders slumped, and his hands rested on his knees as if he was carrying a burden far heavier than the one his body could bear. As she placed the meal on the counter, she caught his gaze. There was something about him that struck her, an almost palpable sense of exhaustion. Not just physical, but mental too. She recognized it instantly. She had been there. She had felt the same weight of failure, the same weariness. It wasn't just about food for him. It was about more than that. Emma smiled kindly, offering him a few encouraging words. "Don't give up, okay? Whatever it is you're fighting, keep going. You'll get there," she said softly, her voice sincere. The man looked up at her, startled by the warmth in her tone. For a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate, as though her words had pierced through the walls he had built around himself. Then, with a faint but grateful smile, he nodded. "Thanks," he muttered quietly, and then dug into his meal. Emma watched him from behind the counter as he took his first bite of the grilled cheese, his face softening with each mouthful. She couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't much, just a simple meal, but sometimes it was the small gestures that meant the most. She turned back to her truck, feeling a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The afternoon dragged on, each minute stretching longer than the last. Emma watched the clock on her phone, checking the time every few minutes, despite knowing it wouldn't change anything. Rent was due next week, and with each passing day, her stress only grew heavier. Her food truck's once bright colors had faded with time and neglect, the paint now peeling in several places, exposing the rust beneath. The small refrigerator hummed unsteadily, and every time it made an unsettling grinding noise, Emma's heart would skip a beat. She couldn't afford a new one, but she had no choice but to pray that it would last a little longer. The truck had always been a dream, something she had built with her own hands. She had fought hard to make it a success, but despite her passion and skill, the reality of running a food truck in a city filled with competition was nothing like she had imagined. She had thought the food truck would be a way to connect with people, to share her love for food in a more personal way than working in sterile kitchens of high-end restaurants. But instead, it felt like an uphill battle that never ended. Her mind wandered to the pile of bills she had shoved into the glove compartment. Every day that went by without a real customer was another day that pushed her closer to the edge. The truck was her livelihood, and if she didn't figure out how to turn things around, she would lose it all. She had already cut down on so many expenses, fewer ingredients, smaller portions, even the days she worked, hoping it would stretch her dwindling savings just a little longer. And yet, the customers remained few and far between. The park, once bustling with families and groups of friends enjoying their lunch breaks, felt eerily empty. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long shadow over the area, but still no one approached her food truck. Emma's shoulders sagged as she leaned against the side of the truck, eyes scanning the street for any sign of life. It seemed like an impossible dream to think things could ever be different, like she was trapped in a loop of uncertainty. Just as she was beginning to feel the weight of it all pressing down on her chest, she heard the screech of tires. Her head snapped toward the noise, and she saw a young man approaching. It was the same man from earlier, Daniel, the one who had come to her truck looking worn out and hungry. Emma blinked, surprised to see him again. He had finished his meal earlier, paid with a crumpled bill, and walked away with his shoulders slightly more squared than when he had first arrived. But now, he was back. He walked with a purpose, his gait less hesitant than before. His clothes, while still not pristine, were now cleaner, and his hair had been combed into a more organized style. He was carrying something in his hand, an old paper bag that looked like it had seen better days. Daniel stopped in front of her truck, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been before, but still carrying an undercurrent of sincerity. You still open?" Emma smiled, her tired face breaking into a genuine grin, despite the exhaustion that was tugging at her every muscle. "Of course, Daniel. You need something else?" He hesitated, his eyes flickering down at the counter before meeting her gaze again. "Actually, I just wanted to thank you. For earlier," he said, pulling the bag from his side and placing it on the counter. "I was hungry, but more than that, I think I needed to hear what you said." Emma felt a small pang of surprise. I just said what was on my mind, she replied, but there was a warmth in her voice that wasn't forced. Daniel opened the bag and pulled out a small notebook, handing it to her. I've been trying to get into food blogging for a while now, he said, his words coming more freely, less guarded than before. It's been rough, but after that meal and the things you said to me, I don't know. Something clicked. I started writing a few things down and figured I'd give it another shot. He paused, then added, I just wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it's something I started doing because you helped me believe I could keep going. Emma stared at the notebook, feeling a lump form in her throat. Daniel, this is incredible, she said, gently taking the notebook from his hands. I didn't expect anything in return. I'm not asking for anything, Daniel replied quickly, his voice firm yet kind. I just wanted you to know you made a difference, even if it was just for that moment. You probably don't realize it, but sometimes all someone needs is a little kindness and a meal to keep going. For a long moment, Emma didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and awe. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had simply been there, offering him a warm meal and a few words of encouragement. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her, transformed. He wasn't the same defeated person he had been earlier. He was full of hope, of drive, of determination. And in a strange way, Emma realized that it was all because of her. Before she could say anything else, Daniel added, I know you're probably struggling too. All this. He gestured to her truck, his eyes softening. I don't know what you're going through, but I just wanted to say, don't give up. Whatever it is, don't give up. Emma nodded slowly, feeling a surge of emotion overwhelm her. She hadn't expected this kind of connection today, but she was glad it had happened. Thank you, Daniel, she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. He smiled, a genuine, bright smile that seemed to carry all the weight of the world in its warmth. Take care of yourself, he said softly before turning to leave. Emma watched him go, her heart swelling with a mix of admiration and something else, something that felt like hope. As she stood there, the park slowly starting to fill with the golden light of the setting sun, Emma realized that maybe this was the sign she had been waiting for. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe this wasn't the end after all. The next few days felt like a blur to Emma. The cool autumn air, the constant hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on her phone, everything seemed to slow down as she tried to push through the routine. Business hadn't improved, and there were still moments when the weight of the bills, the rent due, and the truck's worsening condition threatened to swallow her whole. But something about Daniel's visit lingered in her thoughts, something that made her pause when she considered giving up. Every time she thought about it, she found herself returning to the notebook he had left behind. She didn't open it immediately after he left. The first few days, she left it on the counter of her food truck, untouched. But finally, one night after closing, she sat in the dim light of the truck, the windows fogged from the chilly night air, and opened it. The pages were filled with ideas, recipes, stories, and dreams. There was a raw honesty to his writing, a kind of vulnerability that made Emma's chest tighten with empathy. She read the words carefully, letting them sink in. Each entry revealed how hard Daniel had worked to turn his life around. His journey was a mix of late nights, uncertainty, and small victories, much like her own, but with the added ambition of reaching for something bigger. He had started from nothing, just like Emma, but now he was building something, pushing forward despite the obstacles. She flipped through the pages, impressed by his creativity and persistence, but what struck her most was the last entry. No one tells you how much you need people. The people who believe in you when you don't believe in yourself. Today, someone gave me a meal, and it was more than just food. It was encouragement. It was a reminder that you can keep going. To anyone who is reading this, don't give up. If I can make it, so can you. Emma closed the notebook slowly, her heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of connection. She hadn't expected to have such an impact on him, nor did she expect that the small act of kindness, just feeding a hungry soul, could ripple out in ways she couldn't possibly understand. The world had a strange way of working, didn't it? A small gesture could sometimes be the spark someone needed to change everything. And now here she was, reading Daniel's words and feeling that same spark ignite within her. She had given him a meal, just a simple, humble meal. But it had changed something in him. And perhaps, just perhaps, it could do the same for her. Emma sat there for a long time, the notebook resting in her lap. The truck was quiet, save for the occasional groan from the refrigerator. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. Her eyes wandered to the faded photos on the wall, pictures from when she first started, when the truck had been brand new, when hope had been a living, breathing thing. Maybe it was still possible. Maybe she wasn't as far gone as she thought. As she thought about her next steps, she couldn't help but remember the words Daniel had said to her. Don't give up. The truth in those words was simple, but it resonated deeply. Perhaps she had been giving up on herself for too long. She had to stop seeing herself as a failure. She had to stop thinking of this food truck as her last chance, and instead see it as the beginning. That night, after closing, Emma made a decision. She would fight. She wasn't going to quit just because things were tough. She would change her mindset, change her approach, and maybe, just maybe, she could turn things around. The next day, Emma woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that it would take more than just a good attitude to turn things around, but she was willing to fight for it. She needed a plan, and it had to be bold. She started by fixing what she could. She found a local mechanic to come by and take a look at her truck's fridge, hoping it would last just a little longer. The truck's exterior needed work too, and though she couldn't afford a full repaint, she could at least touch up the faded areas. But most importantly, Emma began to think about her menu. She had always prided herself on comfort food, but maybe it was time to rethink her approach. She didn't need to serve gimmicky dishes, but perhaps there was a way to make her food stand out more. Something that would make people stop and think. A small change, a new twist on an old favorite, might just be the key bringing people in. She began testing new recipes, refining the flavors she had always loved, but this time with an eye for something more innovative. At the same time, she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed to get the word out. She needed help to market herself better, to get more eyes on her food. And for the first time in a long time, she thought about asking for help. Her thoughts immediately turned to Daniel. Could he help her? His success with his food blog had been quick, and his ability to connect with people was evident. Emma wasn't sure if he would be willing to help, but she decided she had nothing to lose by asking. Maybe, just maybe, he could offer some advice, or even some guidance on how to make her food more visible to the people who needed to see it. A week later, after much hesitation, Emma called Daniel. She had looked up his blog and seen how far he had come. He had managed to build an audience from scratch, and now his blog was gaining traction, with sponsorships and opportunities pouring in. She knew that if he had any advice, it could make all the difference. When Daniel answered, she was surprised at how eager he was to listen. They spoke for nearly an hour, with Emma pouring out her worries, her hopes, and her struggles. Daniel listened intently, offering suggestions along the way. He spoke about the power of social media, about connecting with the right audience, and most importantly, about building a story around her food. People don't just buy food, he told her. They buy the story behind it. And your story? It's one of passion. People can feel that. As they wrapped up the conversation, Daniel offered to help her set up a website and social media pages for her food truck. It's a small start, he said, but it's a start. Let's get your story out there. Emma felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. She had help, she had direction, and most importantly, she had hope again. Emma's life began to shift in small but significant ways after her conversation with Daniel. The very next day, she took his advice to heart and began making changes. She cleaned out her social media accounts, dusted off the website she had started years ago but never found the time to finish, and started posting about the stories behind her food. She shared the journey of Emma's Comfort Eats, how it all began, the struggles she had faced, and the dreams that kept her going despite the hardships. She told the truth about how it wasn't always glamorous, how there were days when the future seemed uncertain, but how every plate of food served was a testament to her perseverance. It was a gamble. She wasn't sure how people would respond. The world of food blogs, food trucks, and Instagram influencers felt so distant from her reality. But Daniel's words echoed in her mind. People don't just buy food, they buy the story behind it. She posted pictures of her classic comfort foods, hearty meatloaf sandwiches, gooey mac and cheese, savory pot pies, alongside stories from her life. She shared a post about her mother, a woman who had taught her how to cook with love and patience, and another about her early days in culinary school, when she could barely afford rent and had to rely on ramen noodles for dinner. Slowly but surely, people began to take notice. The response wasn't overwhelming at first. Emma wasn't expecting instant success, but there was something different about the way people interacted with her posts. They didn't just like the photos. They commented. They shared their own stories of struggling to find their way, of working hard to follow their dreams despite the odds. And through that exchange, Emma felt a connection with her community that she hadn't felt in a long time. People weren't just responding to her food, they were responding to her authenticity. One morning, after an especially busy lunch rush, Emma sat down in the quiet of her truck, taking a rare moment to catch her breath. She opened her phone and checked the notifications. Her post about the meatloaf sandwich had gone viral. Well, not viral in the sense of internet fame, but it had definitely reached more people than she ever anticipated. Her follower count had spiked, and she was getting messages from potential customers, some even asking where they could find her truck. It felt surreal. Was this really happening? Just as she was about to reply to a message from a food blogger who had seen her post, she heard the sound of footsteps outside her truck. Emma glanced up and saw Daniel standing by the window, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a bag in the other. He smiled when he saw her glance up and waved. "Got you something," he said as he handed her the bag. Emma opened it to find a collection of freshly baked pastries, still warm from the oven. "I thought you might need something to snack on," Daniel added with a wink. "Also, I thought I'd bring you this." He pulled out a small notebook, this time one with a clean, elegant cover. "I started writing down some thoughts, things I think could help. Consider it a kind of guide, for the next steps." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to do this, Daniel. I'm not sure I can accept all this help." Daniel's smile softened, his eyes meeting hers with that same sincerity. "You helped me. You gave me more than just a meal that day. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, a reminder to keep going. I'd be foolish not to pass it forward, right?" Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had given him a meal, just a simple meal, and yet it had changed his life in ways she could never have predicted. And now here he was, offering her more than she ever expected in return. A guide, support, and encouragement to keep pushing forward when she wasn't sure she could. She accepted the pastries and the notebook, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I don't know what to say, Daniel. You've already done so much for me." "You've got this, Emma," he said, placing a hand gently on the side of the truck, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. "You're just getting started. You've already shown that you can do the hard part, showing up every day. Now, let's figure out how to make it easier for you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With Daniel's notebook in hand, Emma began to implement his advice. The notebook contained a mix of practical tips: how to streamline her menu, how to better showcase her dishes with photography, how to engage her growing audience. But it also had heartfelt notes about mindset and the power of community. Daniel wrote about how important it was to stay authentic to herself, to remember why she started this journey in the first place, and to never lose sight of the heart of her business, providing comfort, connection, and food that told a story. Emma took it all in. She tweaked her menu, removing some of the items that weren't getting the attention they deserved, and adding a few that would be easier to scale up without sacrificing quality. She began taking better photos, paying attention to the small details that would make her food pop on social media. And with every post, every new follower, she felt a little more confident in her decision to keep fighting. But it wasn't just about growing her business anymore. It was about building something meaningful. As she responded to messages from customers, shared more behind-the-scenes glimpses of her life, and met new people through her food, Emma realized that the community she was building wasn't just about food. It was about people who understood the struggles, who had their own dreams, and who wanted to support one another. The morning after she implemented some of the changes Daniel had suggested, Emma found herself looking out at the small crowd that had gathered in front of her truck. It wasn't a massive crowd, but it was enough to make her heart swell with hope. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was running a food truck just to survive. She was building something bigger, something that felt more like home than anything else. As she handed over a container of mac and cheese to a regular customer, she glanced over at Daniel, who had stopped by to check in on her. He gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "You're doing great." Emma couldn't help but smile. She was doing great, and with Daniel's help, she was about to do even better. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's food truck business continued to grow. The changes she had made, both in her approach to food and her online presence, were beginning to pay off. Her followers had increased significantly, and so had her customer base. People from all over the city, and even from neighboring towns, were coming to try her comfort food. Emma's social media accounts were buzzing with compliments, new orders, and even collaborations with local businesses. She felt a sense of momentum she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, it felt like her dream was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality. But despite her success, Emma still couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't about the business. She had learned to navigate that world with newfound confidence. It was about Daniel. He had become such an integral part of her journey, offering advice, support, and even encouragement when she doubted herself. And yet, she had noticed that he had been quieter lately. He still visited the truck from time to time, but his visits had become more sporadic. She hadn't seen him for a few days, and though she didn't want to admit it, she missed him. She couldn't help but wonder what had changed. Had he grown tired of offering help? Did he think she didn't need him anymore? Emma wasn't sure, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She had always been a fiercely independent person, but Daniel had become someone she trusted. She realized, perhaps for the first time, just how much she had come to depend on him, not just for his advice, but for his friendship too. On a particularly busy Friday afternoon, as the sun began to set and the warm orange glow spilled over the park, Emma spotted a familiar black SUV pulling into the lot. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw Daniel step out, dressed sharply as usual. He was holding something in his hand, an envelope. He smiled at her as he approached, but there was a subtle heaviness in his expression that made her pause. "Hey," he said, a little more subdued than usual. "I thought I'd drop by, see how everything's going." "Everything's great," Emma smiled, trying to mask the tightness she felt in her chest. "Really, it's going well. I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time. People are loving the food, and it feels like things are finally moving in the right direction." Daniel nodded, his gaze flickering to the truck. "I'm glad to hear that. You've done an amazing job." He hesitated for a moment before continuing, as though weighing his words carefully. "Emma, I wanted to talk to you about something." Emma's smile faltered slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What's going on, Daniel?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about everything, about my blog, my business, and about you." Emma's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers for a moment. "I've decided to take my business in a different direction. I've been offered some pretty big opportunities, and I think it's time for me to take a step back from the food truck world for a while. I'm going to be focusing more on writing, building my brand, and I think it's time for me to say goodbye to this chapter." Emma blinked, struggling to process what he was saying. "Wait, you're leaving? But you've been such a huge part of this. I don't understand." Daniel's face softened with regret. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I've really enjoyed helping you, Emma. You've got so much potential, and I know you're going to do amazing things. But the truth is, I need to focus on my own path now. I think you're ready to go on your own too. You've built something strong here, something that's yours. It's time for me to step back and let you take it from here." The weight of his words hit Emma like a wave, leaving her momentarily speechless. She had always known that Daniel was driven by his own dreams, but she hadn't expected him to walk away so soon, especially when she had just started to feel like she had finally found her footing. "I don't want to hold you back, Emma," Daniel continued, his voice soft but firm. "You've done the hard work. You've fought through the tough days. I'm just a small part of your story. You don't need me to succeed." Emma's throat tightened, her emotions rising to the surface. She had always prided herself on being independent. But this felt different. Daniel had been more than just a mentor. He had been a friend, someone who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. The thought of losing him, even just as a guiding presence, was almost too much to bear. "Please, don't go," Emma said before she could stop herself. The words felt raw and vulnerable, but they came from a place of real fear. "I don't know if I'm ready to do this without you." Daniel's expression softened, his hand resting on the side of the truck. "Emma, you've always been ready. I know you don't feel like it now, but trust me, you've got this. You've already done more than most people ever will, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be here to cheer you on, to support you from afar. You just don't need me in the way you think you do." He handed her the envelope, and Emma opened it to find a check, a generous one. "This is to help with whatever you need. I want to make sure you're set before I go. Consider it my parting gift, just a small token of gratitude for everything you've done." Emma felt the lump in her throat grow bigger. The check was significant, more than she ever expected, but it was the gesture that mattered most. Daniel was giving her something she didn't ask for, something that would allow her to keep pushing forward. He was setting her free. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she tried to find the right words, but they failed her. Instead, she simply hugged him, a tight, heartfelt embrace that spoke volumes more than words ever could. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel squeezed her tightly. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just grateful to have been part of your journey." With that, Daniel stepped back, smiling one last time before walking toward his car. Emma watched him go, the lump in her throat slowly giving way to a mixture of sadness and hope. As he drove off, the weight of his absence settled in, but so did a newfound clarity. She was ready to take the next step. She wasn't alone anymore. Not really. Daniel had given her the tools, the belief, and the foundation. Now it was time to build on it, to keep going. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emma wasn't afraid anymore. She had everything she needed to succeed: her passion, her food, and the community that had begun to form around her. With or without Daniel, she knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. The year had passed in a blur of ups and downs, each day bringing a new challenge for Emma. Her food truck, though still operational, seemed to be fighting her at every turn. The weather had begun to turn cold again, and with it, the customers grew fewer. The crisp autumn air, while refreshing, was a reminder that business slowed when the seasons changed. She still clung to the hope that things would pick up. She had to. Rent was once again due, and though she had been able to scrape by in the past, the pressure felt heavier this time. The truck's old engine was beginning to falter, its once reliable hum now replaced by the sound of ominous groaning. The refrigerator that had been repaired so many times was on the verge of dying once again, and the peeling paint on the sides of the truck was a glaring reminder of the money Emma didn't have to spare. She had to choose between replacing the equipment and keeping the truck running. Every decision seemed to pile on the weight of the last. Emma had found herself waking up early, heart pounding, not from excitement, but from dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to give, that this dream she'd worked so hard to build would come crashing down. The thought of letting go, of closing the doors for good, felt like a failure she couldn't face. The people who had started coming regularly to her food truck, who had become loyal customers, were growing fewer. Emma had begun to notice their hesitation. The food was still good, still warm and comforting, but the crowd wasn't there in the same way. The steady stream of income she had once relied on had become a trickle. With rent looming and the truck's needs growing, Emma had no choice but to make a decision. She walked through the park one evening, as dusk fell and the chill of evening crept in. The leaves crunched underfoot, and the familiar scent of the autumn air mixed with the distant smell of fried food from other trucks. It was in the midst of this walk that she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around, startled, and there he was, Daniel. "Hey, Emma," he greeted her with a broad smile. The change in him was immediately apparent. He looked different, cleaner, sharper, and much more confident. His casual clothes had been replaced with a well-tailored jacket and designer jeans, and his hair, once tousled, was now styled perfectly. Daniel blinked, trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the exhausted, hungry figure who had come to her food truck a year ago. He looked like someone entirely new. I know, he said, his grin widening. "You probably don't recognize me. A lot has changed, huh?" Emma nodded, still in shock. "You look amazing. What happened to you?" Daniel laughed softly, a sound that was full of self-awareness and perhaps a hint of pride. "A lot, actually. After that day, I just kept pushing forward. I started focusing more on my food blog, sharing recipes, reviews, stories from my own experiences. It took off faster than I ever expected. Sponsored deals, partnerships, and then one day, I was contacted by investors, and well, now I have my own restaurant." Emma stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. "Wait, what? Your own restaurant?" "Yep," Daniel confirmed, his eyes sparkling. "It's called Daniel's Corner, a place where people can get comfort food with a twist. It's been going well, bigger than I thought it would be. And now I've got a few locations opening up with a solid team behind me. I even started doing some public speaking, sharing my journey with other aspiring foodies." "Daniel, that's incredible," Emma said, her voice full of disbelief. "I never thought you'd get so big so fast." Daniel chuckled, looking down at his shoes for a moment. "It's been a ride. But none of this would have been possible without that meal you gave me. I haven't forgotten that day. In fact, it's the reason I'm here right now." Emma felt a pang in her chest. The memories of that moment, the simple meal she had offered him, the quiet conversation, suddenly came rushing back. She had no idea that it would lead to all of this. "I never thought something so small could lead to this," she murmured, shaking her head. Daniel's eyes softened as he met her gaze. "It wasn't small, Emma. You gave me more than just a meal. You gave me hope, and that's something money can't buy." Emma looked away, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "It wasn't just me, Daniel. You were the one who worked hard. You're the one who kept pushing," he nodded. "But you gave me the push I needed. That's why I wanted to come back and see you. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Emma was about to respond when Daniel pulled a sleek black envelope from his jacket. He handed it to her, his expression serious. "I want to help you, Emma. I know you're struggling. I've been where you are, and I've been thinking for a while now about how I can pay forward what you did for me. I want to invest in your food truck." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What? Daniel, no, I can't accept that." But Daniel cut her off gently, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, listen. You've worked so hard, and I've seen how passionate you are about this. Your food deserves to be shared with more people. You deserve to thrive, not just survive. I can help you take this to the next level." Her mind raced. The weight of his offer hung heavily in the air, but Emma was still unsure. The thought of expanding, of changing everything she had worked for, was terrifying. But what if I fail? What if I can't handle it? Daniel smiled gently. "That's the thing about failure. It's part of success. The only way to fail is to give up. You've never been the type to give up. I know you can do this. You're not alone anymore." Emma stared at him, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Could she really do it? Could she take this leap of faith and risk everything, knowing that her future could be brighter, but also fraught with uncertainty? Before she could respond, Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take your time. No pressure. But I think you should seriously consider it. This is your moment, Emma." As she stood there, looking into his eyes, she felt something shift inside her. The fear that had been holding her back, the fear that had kept her from dreaming bigger, was starting to dissipate. She had always believed in herself, but now she had someone who believed in her too. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'm in. Let's do it." Daniel's face lit up with relief and excitement. "I knew you'd say yes." As he drove away, leaving her with the envelope and the weight of the decision, Emma felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in months. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer walking it alone. With Daniel's support, she could finally take the leap she had been too afraid to take. For the first time in a long while, Emma was no longer just struggling to stay afloat. She was building something. Something that was hers. Something that could grow. And she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Daniel's unexpected visit felt like a whirlwind. Emma had gone from barely holding on to suddenly having a life-changing opportunity within reach. As she continued to work on her food truck, preparing the same comforting meals that had kept her going, her mind kept returning to Daniel's offer. Could she really do it? Could she let go of the fear and take that risk? For the first time in ages, she felt a flicker of hope. The weight that had been on her shoulders for months felt lighter, and the endless days of financial worry seemed, for the first time, to have a potential end in sight. But just as quickly as hope arrived, doubt crept in. Emma had always prided herself on being independent, on handling things on her own. The idea of relying on someone else, of growing beyond her small, safe food truck, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her thoughts were interrupted one cold afternoon as she finished cleaning up the truck. The weather had taken a turn, and with the chill came a slow afternoon of barely any customers. Emma stood behind the counter, staring out at the park, her arms crossed over her chest as she daydreamed about what could be. That's when she saw it. An SUV, sleek and black, pulling up directly in front of her food truck. She froze, the familiar pang of anxiety settling in her stomach. It was one of those high-end, shiny vehicles that you only saw in the city center, a sign of wealth and success. It wasn't unusual for rich people to drive by, but this SUV felt different. And then, as if her gut had known it before her eyes had fully processed it, the door opened. And there he was, Daniel. He stepped out of the vehicle, the confident, polished man she had seen a week ago. The same man who had changed her life with his offer and reminded her of her own potential. But this time, there was something more. He wasn't just here to check in. He was here to make an impact. Emma stood frozen for a moment. She hadn't expected him to visit again, at least not so soon. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and took a deep breath before walking toward him. "Daniel," she greeted, a smile playing on her lips, but a hint of unease still settling in her chest. "I didn't expect to see you today." I know, Daniel said with a grin, clearly amused by her surprise. "I didn't plan on dropping by either, but something's come up, and I thought you'd want to hear about it." The air between them felt thick with anticipation. Emma couldn't help but wonder if this was it, the next step, the moment when everything would change. She tried to push the nerves aside as she gestured to the bench nearby. "Why don't we sit down? It's too cold to be standing out here." They both made their way to the bench just a few steps away, Emma feeling the weight of his presence beside her. As they sat, Daniel turned to her, the calm look on his face replaced with an excited intensity that made Emma's heart race. "Emma," he began, his voice low but full of conviction, "I've been thinking about what we discussed, about the food truck, about you. And well, I want to take this a step further." Emma blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Now take it further. What do you mean?" "Look," Daniel said, pausing to meet her eyes, "you know how much I believe in you. You've got the passion, the drive, everything it takes. But your truck, it's not enough. You need more. I've been looking into it, and I have a proposal that might seem crazy, but trust me when I say it's exactly what you need to make it work." Emma leaned in, trying to absorb every word. "What kind of proposal?" He smiled, clearly excited to share. "I've been in talks with investors. They're interested in your food truck concept. They think you've got a brand with the potential to go national. If you're willing to expand, I think we can get you a deal that'll help you grow your business to something much bigger. Think multiple trucks, even franchises. But it's going to take more than just a little investment. It'll mean letting go of some control, expanding your team, and moving fast." Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. It wasn't just about keeping her food truck alive. It was about building an empire. She had spent years dreaming of this, but now that it was on the table, the weight of it threatened to crush her. "I don't know, Daniel," she said, her voice faltering. "This sounds like a lot. I've never run more than one truck before. What if I fail? What if it all falls apart?" Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "You won't fail. You've already proven that you can make this work. And now you'll have the resources to take it to the next level. You'll have me, and you'll have a team to help you every step of the way. Emma's mind raced. She had always been independent, always handled everything herself. The thought of working with a team, of giving up some control, made her uneasy. But deep down, she knew this was the opportunity she couldn't pass up. This was her chance to make her dream a reality. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Okay, I'll do it. Let's make it happen. Daniel's grin widened, and for a moment, Emma thought she saw a glint of pride in his eyes. I knew you'd say that, he said. I'll set up a meeting with the investors. They're eager to meet you. This is just the beginning, Emma. You're about to take your first step towards something amazing. As Daniel stood up and walked toward his SUV, Emma sat there, trying to absorb everything. The cold breeze still swept through the park, but she felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, Emma wasn't just surviving. She was about to thrive. The weight of fear and doubt that had held her back was finally lifting, replaced by the excitement of a future she had never dared to imagine. With Daniel's help, she wasn't just going to run a food truck. She was going to build a legacy, and nothing would stop her now. The next few days felt like a blur, a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Emma had agreed to Daniel's proposal, but she still couldn't quite believe that her dream was finally beginning to take shape. As the meeting with the investors was scheduled, Emma spent her time perfecting her food truck, cleaning every corner, and ensuring that everything was ready for the next chapter in her journey. Still, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the precipice of something huge, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Then came the meeting. It was at a sleek downtown office building, far removed from the cozy little park where Emma had always parked her truck. The glass walls, the polished floors, the constant hum of city life outside. It felt like a world apart from her humble beginnings. But Daniel was there, waiting for her in the lobby, his sharp suit and confident smile making her feel both out of place and hopeful at the same time. Emma! Daniel greeted, standing up from a modern chair as she entered. I'm so glad you could make it. Are you ready? Her heart raced. I think so, she said, though she didn't feel ready at all. Daniel smiled, his warm energy immediately easing her tension. You've got this. Just be yourself. They're not here to judge. They're here to help you succeed. Emma nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had always felt most comfortable with a spatula in hand, in the kitchen, where the action felt real. But today, she was about to do something far outside her comfort zone, pitch her dream to people with deep pockets and the power to make it a reality. As they walked into the boardroom, the group of investors looked up from their laptops, giving her curious but warm smiles. Daniel introduced her, and Emma took a deep breath before beginning her presentation. She explained her journey, how she had gone from culinary school to working in high-end restaurants, then to launching her food truck, Emma's Comfort Eats. She shared her struggles, the challenges of competing in a saturated market, and her dedication to making delicious, hearty meals that people could enjoy, no matter their background or income. As she spoke, Emma saw the investors lean in, some of them nodding along, others scribbling notes. She spoke passionately about her vision, to take Emma's Comfort Eats to the next level, expanding to multiple trucks, and eventually creating a brand that could become a household name. She told them about her commitment to quality, to community, and to using her business as a way to bring people together, no matter where they came from. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Emma's heart raced as she wondered if she had said enough. Had she convinced them? Or had she missed her chance? Then one of the investors, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s with a commanding presence, spoke up. I like what I'm hearing, she said. You have the passion, Emma. That's clear. But what really stands out is your authenticity. People love a story, and your story is what will make this brand resonate with customers. You're not just selling food. You're offering comfort, community, and something real. Another investor chimed in. And the market is ready for this. We've seen food trucks explode in popularity, but very few offer a product that feels this grounded. You're tapping into nostalgia, into a simpler time, and that's something people are craving right now. Emma felt a rush of relief. It seemed like they understood her vision, like they saw her for who she was and what she wanted to build. But the woman who had spoken earlier wasn't finished yet. "We want to be a part of this. We're willing to invest in you, Emma, and we think you've got what it takes to make this work. But we'll need to see a clear plan. We'll need to know how you'll scale, how you'll handle the operations of multiple trucks, and how you'll build a brand that stands out in a crowded market." Daniel, who had been sitting quietly beside her, leaned forward and smiled at Emma. "This is it, Emma. This is your chance to take your dream and turn it into something real. They're ready to help you." Emma felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "Let's make it happen." The room erupted into applause, and Daniel's smile widened. He had believed in her from the start, and now it seemed like everyone else did too. After the meeting, Emma walked out of the building feeling like she was walking on air. For the first time in years, the weight of uncertainty seemed to lift. She was no longer just a woman with a food truck struggling to stay afloat. She was a businesswoman with a future ahead of her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the investors' words, their belief in her. She thought about the long road ahead, about the expansion, the new challenges, and the risks. But most of all, she thought about the people she would be able to reach with her food, how she could build a community of people who believed in the same things she did: quality, authenticity, and comfort. The next morning, Daniel called her with the news she'd been waiting for. The investors had agreed to the deal. They would help her expand, bringing in the capital needed to open additional trucks and establish a stronger brand presence. They even mentioned franchising possibilities down the line. Emma couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had taken that leap, and now she had the support and resources to turn her food truck into something bigger. But she knew that none of this would have been possible without Daniel's belief in her. She picked up the phone and called him. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Daniel's voice was warm on the other end of the line. "You didn't need to believe in yourself, Emma. You just needed to take that first step. You've got everything it takes to succeed, and I'm honored to be a part of this journey with you." As Emma sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized just how far she had come. The young woman who had once doubted herself, who had struggled to keep her dream alive, was now on the brink of something incredible. She wasn't just about to open more trucks. She was about to open a whole new chapter in her life, one that would change everything. The story of Emma's Comfort Eats was just beginning, and this time, she was ready for whatever came next. As the days following the meeting with the investors unfolded, Emma couldn't help but feel as if she were standing at the edge of a precipice. Each step she took in her daily routine felt heavier with the weight of what was to come. The moment she had dreamed about for so long was finally within her reach. But as much as she felt the excitement of possibilities, there was also a gnawing sense of fear, a deep uncertainty. Could she really do it? Could she go beyond just a food truck and build a full-fledged business empire? One evening, as Emma sat alone in her food truck after another slow day, the weight of these questions threatened to overwhelm her. She wiped down the counter and glanced out at the empty park. The few customers she'd had earlier seemed to enjoy the food, but the number of people visiting her food truck had dwindled with the colder weather. Rent was just around the corner again, and though the investment from the group was a lifeline, it also meant a world of new responsibilities. She wasn't just running a food truck anymore. She was about to manage a growing business, something far more complex. That night, after locking up her truck, Emma walked home slowly, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her musings. It was a text from Daniel. "I've been thinking about you all day. I can tell you're feeling the weight of this decision, and I get it. But I want you to know I'm here. You're not alone in this. We're building this together." Emma paused on the sidewalk, her heart swelling with gratitude. Daniel had always been there for her, even when she doubted herself. He had seen something in her long before she saw it in herself. And now he was offering her more than just money. He was offering his trust, his belief in her, and a partnership that she had never imagined possible. She typed a quick reply, "Thank you. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything, but I'm starting to see it now. I think I'm ready." The next day, Emma met with Daniel at the same downtown office building. This time, the setting felt different. Emma was no longer the nervous, uncertain woman who had first walked into this space. She was a woman with a purpose, with a vision, ready to take the leap. Daniel greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Ready to take this next step?" he asked, his eyes filled with excitement. Emma nodded, her nerves now steadied by the clarity of her decision. "I am. Let's do this. But I need to know what this really means. What's next?" Daniel sat her down in a small conference room. On the table in front of them were blueprints, financial projections, and a detailed timeline of what the expansion would look like. It was real now. No turning back. He flipped through the pages, explaining the plan step by step. "We'll start by bringing in 2 more food trucks. We'll station them in other parts of the city where food trucks are popular. We'll need to hire a couple of new chefs, make sure the food and service are consistent, and begin building a larger brand presence online. We'll push hard with social media campaigns, using the story of your food truck and the comfort food angle as the hook." Emma listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She could feel her heartbeat quicken as she realized the scale of what she was about to take on. But with each passing minute, the fear that had once held her back began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of purpose. This was no longer a dream. It was a plan. A real plan. "That sounds amazing," Emma said, her voice steady now. "But what happens after we open the new trucks? How do we ensure that we're building something sustainable?" Daniel smiled and leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "That's where it gets interesting. Once we've got a solid presence in the city, we'll look into franchising. We can take Emma's Comfort Eats nationwide, but we'll do it slowly, carefully, no rushing. We need to make sure the quality of the food, the experience, and the brand stay true to what we're about." Emma felt a surge of both exhilaration and fear. National. Franchise. Those words echoed in her mind as Daniel continued to speak about the logistics and operational details. But through it all, one thing became abundantly clear. She was no longer running a small, local food truck. She was about to build a brand that could become a household name. As the meeting came to an end, Daniel placed his hand on the table, leaning forward. "Emma, this is going to be big. You're not just going to grow a food truck business. You're going to change the food industry, but it's going to require all of you, your heart, your soul, your passion. Are you ready for that?" Emma didn't hesitate. She looked him in the eye, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'm ready." Over the next few weeks, the pace of Emma's life quickened. She worked tirelessly with Daniel and the new team, coordinating the expansion of the trucks, working on marketing materials, and refining her recipes to ensure they would scale. There were countless meetings, endless phone calls, and long hours of planning. Every night, Emma returned home, exhausted but invigorated by the progress she was making. And through it all, Daniel remained by her side. He was her partner, her guide, helping her navigate the overwhelming sea of decisions that came with growing a business. The more they worked together, the more Emma realized that she had found a true collaborator, someone who believed in her vision as much as she did. Finally, the day came when Emma's Comfort Eats opened its second food truck in a bustling district of the city. The line stretched for blocks as people flocked to taste the comfort food they had been hearing so much about. Emma stood behind the counter, the familiar feeling of excitement and nervousness flooding her all over again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had a team, both in the kitchen and in the office, working with her to make this dream a reality. As the day wound down, Emma stepped outside the truck for a moment of quiet reflection. She looked around at the bustling street, at the faces of people who had come out to try her food, and at the bustling energy of the city. It was a moment of clarity. She wasn't just building a business. She was creating something that would bring people together. Something that would make them feel at home, no matter where they were. She wasn't just serving food, she was serving memories, comfort, and connection. Daniel joined her outside, standing quietly by her side. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Emma smiled, her heart full. "We did it, and this is just the beginning." The weeks following the opening of the second food truck were a blur of activity. Emma worked relentlessly, overseeing the operations at both locations, meeting with the team, and making decisions about the direction of the brand. She found herself spread thin, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Each day, the business grew a little bit more, and every night, as she lay in bed, she could hardly believe how far she had come. But even as the business expanded, the pressure mounted. The reality of running multiple food trucks, managing a growing team, and keeping up with customer demands was far more challenging than Emma had anticipated. The more successful the business became, the more responsibility she felt on her shoulders. There were moments when she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of losing control, of being overwhelmed by the very thing she had worked so hard to build. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, Emma stood in the small kitchen of her food truck, staring at the various orders piling up. She could hear the chatter from the kitchen staff, the sizzle of the grill, and the hum of the food truck's equipment. It should have been a satisfying noise, a sound of success, but instead, it felt like a cacophony of chaos, reminding her of everything that still needed to be done. Daniel had been a constant source of support, but even his encouraging words couldn't shake the anxiety that had begun to creep into Emma's mind. The weight of responsibility was immense, and she found herself second-guessing every decision, worrying about whether she had made the right choices. What if the business couldn't handle the expansion? What if the food quality suffered? What if she wasn't cut out for the task ahead? On top of all that, there was the looming decision about the franchise. While the idea had seemed exciting at first, the reality of turning Emma's Comfort Eats into a national brand was starting to feel like an insurmountable mountain. She had never been a businesswoman. She was a chef, a creator of food that brought people joy. The thought of handing over parts of her business to others, of delegating the soul of what she had worked so hard to build, left her with a pit in her stomach. As Emma stood in the kitchen, lost in her thoughts, Daniel walked in. He had been out visiting the other locations and was always keen to check in, to make sure everything was running smoothly. He caught sight of Emma's troubled expression and immediately sensed that something was wrong. "You okay?" he asked gently, his voice laced with concern. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know, Daniel. I'm just overwhelmed. I thought I could handle it, but the more we grow, the more I feel like I'm losing control. It's like I'm drowning in it all." Daniel didn't say anything at first. He simply walked over to where she was standing and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I can see it. I know it's a lot, but you're not alone in this. You have me, and you have your team, and you don't have to do it all at once." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But that's just it. We're moving so fast. It feels like the wheels are turning, and I can't stop them. I'm scared, Daniel. Scared that we're expanding too quickly. Scared that I'm not enough to keep it all together." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, his expression softening. "I get it. It's scary. But you know what I believe? I believe that the greatest successes come from taking risks. You've already done the hardest part. You've built something from nothing. That's the biggest risk, and look where it's gotten you. You're stronger than you think." Emma swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I don't know if I can handle more." Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. "You already are. You've handled everything so far. And look at the impact you've had. People love your food because it's real, it's honest, and it's comforting. That's something special. Don't lose sight of that." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a flicker of hope. She had always prided herself on her ability to create something that mattered, something that resonated with people. But somewhere along the way, she had started to lose sight of the very thing that had made her food and her business so special. It wasn't about growth for the sake of growth. It wasn't about becoming a nationwide brand. It was about staying true to the heart of Emma's Comfort Eats, the food, the service, and the connections she made with people every day. "I guess I've just been so focused on the future that I forgot about the present," Emma said softly, her voice filled with realization. Daniel smiled again, his eyes filled with warmth. "It's easy to get caught up in the bigger picture, but remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. You don't have to take on everything at once. You can take it step by step, and we'll do it together. Emma nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe it was time to take a breath and focus on the immediate future. Maybe it was time to slow down, to remember why she started this journey in the first place, and to embrace the risk, knowing that she didn't have to face it alone. Okay, Emma said, her voice steadier now. Let's do this. But let's do it smart. No more rushing ahead. We'll take it one step at a time. Daniel's grin widened. That's the spirit. And with that, Emma knew that the next chapter of her journey would be different. She wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty hold her back anymore. She was ready to take the risk, to trust in herself, to trust in Daniel, and to trust in the heart of her business. Because no matter how big the risk, no matter how daunting the path ahead, she knew one thing for sure: it was worth it. And she wasn't alone. The next few months would be pivotal. Emma took her time to evaluate the best ways to expand, carefully planning each step with Daniel by her side. The food truck industry was a tough one, but Emma had always known that success didn't come easily. It came through passion, through grit, and through making bold decisions with the right support. With her heart focused on her customers and the foundation she had built, she felt ready to take on the next challenge. And little by little, the fear that once gripped her began to fade. The future was still uncertain, but Emma had learned something invaluable. That taking a risk wasn't just about stepping into the unknown, it was about embracing it. Knowing that even in the face of uncertainty, you could create something amazing. She was ready for whatever came next. The transformation of Emma's food truck business was nothing short of incredible. What had started as a single humble truck serving comfort food on a quiet street corner had blossomed into a small empire. Over the next few months, Emma and Daniel's careful planning began to take shape, with new trucks opening in strategic locations. Word of Emma's comfort eats spread quickly as more and more people tasted her simple yet delicious dishes, and the reputation of the food grew. Emma felt a sense of fulfillment each time she visited a new location, seeing the faces of her team working with pride and customers enjoying the food she had poured so much love into. The team she had carefully chosen, chefs who shared her passion for quality food and the community they served, was thriving. She wasn't just managing, she was leading a group of people who believed in her vision. And the best part? She was still deeply connected to her roots, still cooking in the trucks herself, making sure every meal was served with the same care as it had been in the beginning. But it wasn't just the business that was flourishing. Emma herself was changing. The weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders for so long, the pressure to succeed, to grow, to keep it all together, was finally lifting. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. The fear that had once plagued her was gradually replaced with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of hard work, setbacks, and finally seeing the fruits of that labor. But success, as Emma was beginning to understand, didn't always come without challenges. The food truck industry was still competitive, and with the growth of her brand came new problems to solve. One of the most pressing issues was maintaining the quality of her food while scaling up. As they opened new locations, the logistics of keeping everything running smoothly became increasingly complex. Emma was forced to spend more time in meetings with suppliers, marketers, and financial planners than she would have liked. It was a necessary part of running a growing business, but it sometimes took her away from the kitchen, where she truly felt at home. At night, when the trucks were parked and the staff had gone home, Emma would sit in the quiet of her office, her mind buzzing with ideas and to-do lists. She had learned to delegate and trust her team, but there was still a part of her that felt the need to control every aspect of her business. The business was her baby, after all. But it was also growing faster than she had ever imagined, and Emma knew that if she didn't adapt, she would risk losing the very thing she had fought so hard to build. It was during one of these late nights, with the glow of her desk lamp illuminating the stacks of paperwork in front of her, that she heard a knock on the door. She looked up to see Daniel standing there, a warm smile on his face. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice friendly but with a hint of concern. Emma nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Of course. What's up?" Daniel sat down, his gaze flickering to the piles of paperwork before returning to Emma's face. "I can tell something's on your mind," he said gently. "You've been working late a lot recently. You okay?" Emma sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm just trying to figure it all out. The business is growing, and I'm struggling to keep up. I thought I'd feel better by now, but I don't. The stress is getting to me." Daniel nodded, understanding. "I get it. I've seen the weight you've been carrying. But Emma, you don't have to do it all on your own. You've built an incredible team. Let them help you." Emma frowned, but she appreciated his concern. "It's not that simple. I don't want to lose control, Daniel. This is my dream. I've worked so hard for it." "I know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But sometimes the best thing you can do for your dream is to trust the people around you. You've surrounded yourself with capable people, and they want to see you succeed, just like you want them to succeed. Let them take some of the load off." Emma looked at him, considering his words. She had always been the one to take charge, the one who worked tirelessly to make sure everything was perfect. Letting go of that control felt like an impossible step. But deep down, she knew Daniel was right. She had created something great, and it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the entire team. "I know you're right," Emma admitted, her voice quiet. "But it's hard, you know? Letting go. It feels like if I don't keep my hands in everything, it could all fall apart." Daniel smiled, leaning forward. "I get it, but I've seen how much you've grown. You're not the same person who started that food truck a year ago. You've got a solid foundation now. You don't have to be the one who does everything." Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She thought about the early days, when she was alone behind the truck, scraping by with just enough to keep the wheels turning. Back then, the fear of failure had consumed her. But now, she could see how far she had come. She had built something real, something that mattered, not just to her, but to the people she served, to the people she worked with. "I guess it's time to step back a little," she said finally, her voice stronger now. "Let my team do what they do best, and I'll focus on what I do best, making great food and keeping the heart of this business alive." Daniel's eyes lit up. That's exactly the right decision. The next day, Emma called a meeting with her team. She told them that from now on, she would be taking a more hands-off approach, trusting them to run the day-to-day operations while she focused on refining the brand, innovating the menu, and keeping the spirit of Emma's Comfort Eats alive. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would be bumps along the way, but it felt right. In the days and weeks that followed, Emma found that the decision to let go was liberating. She could focus on her passion for cooking and developing new recipes, while the team handled the rest. The business continued to grow, but now it wasn't just about the success of the food truck. It was about the community they had built, the relationships with loyal customers, the camaraderie among the staff, and the love for the food that had started it all. Emma had come full circle. She had started with a single food truck, unsure of her place in the world, but now she was leading a thriving business with a team that believed in her just as much as she believed in them. She wasn't alone in this journey anymore. Together, they were building something bigger than any one person could do on their own. And as Emma looked at the food truck rolling out on a new adventure, she couldn't help but smile. She had taken the risk, and it had paid off in ways she had never imagined. Her new beginning had arrived. As Emma's business expanded and her food trucks flourished in their new locations, the city seemed to be full of promise for her. She had learned to delegate, to trust in her team, and most importantly, to embrace the success that had come with her hard work. But as always, success came with new challenges. The city had always been a hub for food trucks, a thriving part of the local culture. But recently, a new ordinance was introduced, a law that would force food trucks to move away from prime locations, places where their presence had become a beloved staple in the community. Emma had heard about the proposed changes through the grapevine. At first, she thought it was just a rumor, but as she dug deeper, she realized that the city council was seriously considering this ban, which would push food trucks out of the best areas and into less accessible, less profitable spots. Emma felt a cold wave of frustration wash over her. She knew firsthand how important these locations were. They weren't just places to sell food, they were the heart of her business, places where she had built relationships with loyal customers, a community that came together over a shared love of good, honest meals. At first, Emma tried to keep her focus on the business. She had too much to do, managing the trucks, overseeing the kitchen, and innovating new menu items. But as the news spread, it became impossible to ignore. Emma wasn't just a business owner anymore. She was a part of the food truck community, a movement of entrepreneurs who had turned their passion for cooking into something that reached far beyond profit. One evening, as Emma closed up the truck after a long shift, she received a phone call from Lucy, one of her chefs, who was working at the new location in the city center. "Emma, you need to hear this," Lucy said, her voice tight with urgency. "I just got word. They're pushing the vote for the food truck ban next week. If it goes through, we'll have to relocate our trucks, and it's going to be impossible to stay in the area where we are now." The knot in Emma's stomach tightened. She had heard murmurs of a petition against the new law, but now it was real. The stakes had become personal. Her trucks weren't just about food, they were about the people they served, the community she had helped create. Emma knew she couldn't sit back and watch this happen. She had fought too hard to get to this point, and now she was being asked to watch her hard work vanish with the stroke of a pen. The next morning, Emma called an emergency meeting with her team. They gathered in the office at the food truck headquarters, and the mood was heavy. Everyone knew what was at stake, and the thought of losing their prime locations was unsettling. But Emma wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She stood up in front of the group, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about every food truck owner in the city. It's about the community we've built together, the customers who come to us, the families who rely on us, and the people who work for us. We can't let this happen." Her team looked at her, their expressions a mix of determination and concern. They had followed Emma through every challenge, from her humble beginnings with a single truck to the expansion that had brought them to new heights. But this felt different. This was a fight against a system that seemed to be disregarding everything they had worked for. "We need to make our voices heard," Emma continued. "We're going to organize. We'll gather petitions, talk to the people who support us, and show the council that food trucks are a vital part of this community." The plan was set into motion immediately. Emma and her team mobilized with urgency. They printed flyers, created social media campaigns, and began reaching out to other food truck owners in the city. Emma personally visited the trucks she knew, encouraging the owners to join the fight. Every day, she spent hours talking to customers, explaining what was at stake, and urging them to sign the petitions. But Emma knew that petitions alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to make a statement. Something bold, something that would show the city council just how much food trucks meant to the people. Emma rallied her team, and together they planned a rally. It would be held in the heart of the city, right outside City Hall. The idea was simple. They would bring the food trucks together, park them in front of the government building, and serve the community, just as they always had. They would feed the people and stand together, showing that food trucks weren't just businesses. They were an integral part of the city's culture. The rally day arrived, and Emma stood among the other food truck owners, watching as hundreds of customers arrived to show their support. The scene was electric, with people enjoying their favorite dishes, chatting with the truck owners, and signing petitions. The smell of fresh food filled the air, mingling with the sound of laughter and conversation. Emma couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was the power of community, the reason she had started this journey in the first place. As the crowd grew, the tension built. Emma had made her way to the front, where a group of other food truck owners were preparing for their speeches. They had arranged to speak in front of the city council members, who were holding a meeting inside City Hall. Emma took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. Her voice rang out strong and clear as she spoke to the crowd, her words filled with passion and conviction. Food trucks are more than just a business. They are the lifeblood of our community. We bring people together, create opportunities, and support local farmers, artisans, and suppliers. These trucks have been a part of this city for years, and we won't let that be erased. The crowd cheered, and Emma felt a surge of energy. It wasn't just her speaking, it was all of them, standing together for something they all believed in. This wasn't just about keeping her business afloat, it was about preserving the fabric of the city's culture. The rally continued throughout the afternoon, with speakers from all walks of life sharing their thoughts on the importance of food trucks. People from every corner of the city came to show their support. It wasn't just food truck owners who were fighting back. It was the people who loved them, the families who relied on the trucks for affordable, delicious meals, and the locals who cherished the sense of community that came with them. By the time the city council convened that evening, the message was clear. The food trucks had gathered a coalition of support that was impossible to ignore. The council members, who had initially been set on pushing the ban through, couldn't deny the groundswell of opposition. The vote was cast, and after hours of debate, it was official. The food truck ban was rejected. Emma's heart soared as the news spread like wildfire. It was a victory, not just for her, but for every person who believed in the power of community and the simple joy of a good meal shared in the open air. Emma smiled as she looked out over the crowd, her team by her side. They had won. The city had spoken, and it was clear that food trucks were here to stay. As she stood there, Emma realized that this was more than just a business triumph. It was a reminder of what she had always known. When you stand up for what's right, no matter the odds, you can change the world around you. This was just the beginning of her journey. With her team, her customers, and her passion for great food, Emma knew that the future was bright. And so, with the victory behind her and the future ahead, Emma stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. With the victory in her hands, Emma Lawson felt a happiness she had never experienced before. It wasn't because of the success in her business or the growth of her food trucks, but because she had fought for what was right and helped those around her see the value of resilience, community, and a love for simple, honest food. Looking back on the long journey from the first day she stood behind her food truck, when everything seemed fragile and difficult, Emma couldn't help but feel proud of what she had achieved. But she knew that this journey had never been just a personal battle. It was the story of everyone who had come together to build a strong community, where each food truck wasn't just a livelihood but an irreplaceable part of the city, a place where memories and stories were created every single day. Now, with stronger steps ahead, Emma wasn't just the owner of a food truck empire. She was a symbol of the power of perseverance and kindness. She wasn't just serving delicious meals, she was creating opportunities, sparking hope, and changing the way people viewed the value of community. Emma knew that no matter what life threw her way, she would always have a strong team and loyal supporters by her side. People who believed in the power of small acts of kindness and the strength of a united front. Looking into the future, Emma knew she was more than just a businesswoman. She was a creator of opportunities, a catalyst for change, and a person who believed in the transformative power of food and community. And as long as her heart burned with a love for great food and a desire to connect with people, her journey would never end. She had overcome the greatest challenge of her life, and now she was ready for what lay ahead, a future filled with new stories, new challenges, and new triumphs. The road ahead was long, but Emma knew one thing for certain. No matter what, she would never give up on her dream. And in this life, when you have the courage to fight for what you believe in, you will always find the path to success. Thank you for listening and watching. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Emma's journey and watch this story unfold. Your support means the world, and we hope you enjoyed this heartfelt story of perseverance, community, and following your dreams. If you loved the story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might find inspiration in Emma's journey. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can stay updated with more stories like this one. We have many more exciting tales and adventures coming your way. Your support helps us keep creating content that inspires and entertains. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks again, and see you in the next one. Like, share, and subscribe.